Welcome back, everybody, to the sound of sirens. Actually, to me talking about Orb Sceptre Throne again. It's just that it's Saturday at noon, and that's when we test our sirens, apparently. At least I hope so. Otherwise, if I'll get bombed out of the skies right now, then well, that's that. Anyway, I'm finally back on the balcony because I didn't get to record my video last night. I was too fucking tired after having a very stressful week. So here we are now, and we're talking about the first three chapters of Orb Sceptre Throne's second book, which is obviously Sceptre. That's chapters 8, 9, and 10. And there's a lot going on there. We'll see if there's also a lot to talk about there. Yeah, sort of. So, let's go. Cheers. Alright, so, what's there to talk about in these three books? There's a lot happening, and I want to focus on a few of the events there that I feel are interesting to look at. There is obviously the Segula fighting and whatnot part that I need to talk about, even though I'm miserably unqualified to do so. There is more of the usual like post-colonial problems, post-subjugation problems that we have had before in all the Malazan books. There might be more to talk about here with finally the little Chower, not big Chower, but the Barathol situation and even more stuff. Now, where to start though? Well, let's pick out the Segula part. So we have Yusak leading them. We have the whole part there. It is interesting to look at how the Segula structure is shown to us here with just Lo and Sal. Is that their names? I think it's their names. I'm just really not good with names. And how they, kill everyone because they are so, they have so, I don't know, they have that structure of challenge and honor is so deeply ingrained in their culture and in their personality that that's the only lens through which they can see everything. And obviously that's something that we have, that all of us face, or at least there's the danger of us facing that kind of challenge. Like, if we grow up in a specific culture, that's the lens through which we see the world, through which we see everything that happens around us, whether it is, the stuff that happens in our culture or it's in other cultures. Now, it is obviously very helpful to have that lens if you grow up in a specific culture, because that's exactly how you should judge the actions of other people. That's just like how society, that's how culture works. It's a set of perceptions and judgments of specific actions. Well, there's more to it, but that's basically why you have how culture functions for us, right? It's like we know what specific actions mean, and that's how we judge them. Now, through the ages, we've always had both, there's two ways to go about, well, actually two ways. But the main thing is that we have always known that there are other cultures, and they are strange because they behave in weird ways. And there's two ways to deal with that. One of them is to go learn about it and try to figure it out, and try to live in that other culture to understand those rules, perceptions, and whatnot. The other way is to just ignore that and just behave as if your cultural rules are still applying. The second one, obviously, oftentimes is connected with denigrating other cultures. The whole barbarian thing kind of comes from there. In a way, it's like, yeah, those people out there, they don't know how to behave like proper Greeks. They don't even speak our language. They're barbarians, and so forth. I'm just saying proper Greeks because that's sort of where the barbarian discourse first shows up in literature, which doesn't mean that it isn't like omnipresent everywhere else. I don't know, go read the Bible. It's in there as well. So if you have those outsiders, they have different rules. They're not like us. And that has stuck with us up until today. We are still very much guilty of that in a lot of ways. Now, obviously, through what we have nowadays, which is social media, not social media, but in general, mass media, global media, we are more aware of different cultures. We still tend to judge them, and we obviously run into the danger of saying every culture is equally valid, and every cultural rule is equally valid, which on the surface seems like a good way to go about it. It's like, yeah, why would I say my cultural rules and behavior is better than anyone else's? Now, obviously, that should not preclude us from saying specific parts of a specific culture are deplorable. Whether those are, and that's a discussion that you have way more in Stephen Eriksson's work than here in this particular aspect of Cam Esslemont's work. I'm not saying in general, but in this particular way we're seeing it here with the Segula. It doesn't crop up as much as in, say, Dust of Dreams with the hobbling, or maybe also earlier in definitely earlier in House of Chains with all the Bidithal storylines. Not every cultural practice is a good practice, and even though you may not come from that cultural background, you're still able to criticize them. But that's a very, very difficult road to walk, and it's natural that after going full swing into like only our Western British democracy is the way to go to swing the other way. It's like now every cultural practice is valid as such, is sort of the next way to go, but the pendulum is obviously swinging back and forth and those kind of things, and yeah, not everything is equally, not every cultural practice is equally valid. Cultures are valid. Cultural practices, not all of them, which goes for ours as well. There's stuff going on in our cultures that is also fucked up and should be changed, because cultures can change. That's the other side of it. Anyway, that's not what I really wanted to talk about here. The point I wanted to make here is that we see that explored within the Segula culture, because the Segula go and just apply their cultural values and their cultural practices to everything they do wherever they do it. Which is to interpret everything as a challenge, and thus go and kill everyone. Now, it's easy to overlook that in a way, because most of the people, especially Sal and Lo, are killing around here, or earlier when we met Segul in other places. Most of the people they kill are just, are terrible people. They're gangsters, they're bandits, they're like murderers. They plan to rob them and all of that stuff. So yeah, they kind of have it coming. But they have it coming for the wrong reasons in a lot of cases. And you kind of see that in that situation in Auburn Town when Lo and Sal show up and they're like, is he challenging your authority? And it's like, yeah, well, in our culture, you can solve that problem by just, talking, or in the case of Auburn Town, the bandits there, probably just like by punching someone, but not by, murdering people all the time. So we see that part of it. It's like they just use their culture, they apply their cultural lens, their cultural practices to everything they do wherever they go, which is something that comes with a specific feeling of cultural superiority, which once again is something that we have all the time. That this is how colonialism worked for so long. It's like we in the West, in the Northwest, in the mostly European Northwest, and to a point like North America as well, we kind of felt that we have it, right? We know how culture works. And we can behave this arrogantly because we have a superiority in weapons and stuff like that, and technology we had for a long time when we came to other places, military superiority, and so we apply that, and which is in exactly what the Segulae do there as well. The Segulae are superior, militarily superior. They can just go and conquer whatever place they want if they feel like it. Now they're held back mostly by their very specific culture, which is tied to stuff that will be shown in later parts of this book, and their weird connection to the Tyrant of Daruzistan, which, I don't know, we probably should talk about at some point. But anyway, but apart from that, they have that feeling of cultural superiority which allows them to go there and do that kind of thing. Now, the other side of that, obviously, that we see is if you have, like with the Segulae, you have a culture that is very much focused on one thing. In this case, it's military discipline through sword fighting. And you become the best at that specific thing. You tend to judge every aspect of culture through that specific thing. Now, in our day and age, in our culture, that thing is, well, capitalism and success, monetary success most of the time. Now, obviously, there's always people out there that's like, you know what, maybe being rich ain't everything. Those people exist. There's more of them, and so forth, but they're still not the majority. And the governing idea of what makes a person successful and thus deserving of a higher position in our society, a position of power, is success. And success is measured by how much money you make, how much property you own, those kind of things. Implicitly, in a way. It's like, I live in a shitty neighborhood. People will never think of me as a successful person. Does that mean I'm not happy? Probably not. But it's very much that kind of thing that is going on there. And we see with the Segula the same thing. It's like their entire society is built on military excellence with sword fighting. Does that make the Segula the best sword fighters in the world? Probably yes. Well, at least very much up there. Does being a amazing sword fighter make you a good politician? Probably not. A good judger of people's character? Maybe not. Let's say being good with waving around a stick doesn't make you master of the universe, or at least not a good master of the universe, which is something that we'll see later on there as well. It also kind of skews and forces human behavior and human character into a very rigid, structure, rigid corset, basically. And that can lead to damages, which is something we'll see later on when we have the conversation between Yusek and Saul after Saul loses the duel with the monk. Do you say female monk? This is like me not understanding the language thing. Is a female, because I guess it kind of works in a weird way because I'm from a Christian background, roughly. I mean, I'm not a very Christian person, but it's like I feel women that live in a monastery and punch up people are not the same thing as nuns. So probably a monk. Well, anyway, the point is Saul gets defeated, and now he's lost his honor and everything, and he feels like that makes him unworthy of doing anything, which is very the fucked up toll that kind of structure of society puts on everyone. And Yusek kind of gets it, but also there's like a second layer to this. Like the first layer is that kind of structure in general to anyone would, like, if all you are is your skill at arms, the rest of your personality gets kind of sheared away. Makes you blind to who you really are as a person. The second part, however, is in that kind of structure, that father-son relationship, which is once again something that is so very, very important. Parent-children relationships is something that is so very important in the Malazan world in general, that we that makes them stand out compared to other fantasy series, and we have that here again. It's like that situation of trying to impress your parents by doing the same thing they did is like, well, it's a road to disaster in any way. It's like, if you surpass your parents, they don't have a problem with to cope with like the fact that their kids are much better than them. If you don't, you as a kid will always feel like a failure. It's like, yeah, I could never actually reach those heights. Like, that's fucked up. And in that kind of society, it's very difficult to get out of that thing. So you can see the whole Zagule plot line, that focus on honor in battle as something that competitiveness as, well, a structure that is producing extreme excellence in a specific small field, but at a very, very high cost to the individual, to the society, and everyone else. So maybe don't do that. Maybe I'm too critical here, but I have problems with discipline in general, so those Segule are very, very foreign to me and very strange to me. All right, let's have us a look at another one of those topics. Parents, children relationships. We kind of have the same thing. Relations. We kind of have the same thing going on with Vorkan and Tyre in a way, because Vorkan is obviously an assassin. Is she more than that? Well, most likely yes. Well, I mean, we kind of know that she's more than just an assassin. But Tyre is also more than just an assassin. But there's once again that idea that there is that the daughter tries to overcome the shadow of the mother in that regard, which kind of mirrors in a way the theme that is going on with Saul and Lo. Saul and Lo, whatever their names are. Anyway, where in the one case the son doesn't live up to the expectations of the father, at least in that regard. In the other case, it is the daughter that feels that she has to overcome her mother, and we'll see how damaged that is, because once again it leads to a very, very skewed view of the world. Where will that go? Well, we'll see in the future. So we have that. We're going to go into the Moonspawn thing for a second later on as well. We also have interesting parts of the army business going on, which is something we haven't seen much before of. Now that the army has left Pale on the one hand, and all the other armies are kind of converging somewhere, we have that small plot line of that general misfit that ends up in the army, because it's like kind of the only option that's left to him at that point. And this is an important aspect, because while we have seen a lot of, soldier stuff going on in the Malazan army before, we've rarely looked at the person who starts out a criminal career and then just goes to the army, because that's kind of the only option they have at that point. And that's a real thing that happens in life a lot in the real world. Now what we see here is the positive example, or so far maybe the positive example. That's sort of the idea. Is like, what happens if you are, by definition, a person with borderline antisocial behavior, or more than just borderline antisocial behavior? What happens if you're forced into a very, very disciplined environment? Does that actually work? Or not? And we'll see how it will go with, what's his name, Butcher? Is his name Butcher? I think it's something like that. Yeah, Butcher. We'll see how that thing will continue in the future. We have seen like a example of when it ends badly in the previous, in Stonewielder, with that guy whose name I have already forgotten, who was always shirking and trying to get bribes, because they basically just see the army as another opportunity to actually continue their criminal behavior, basically. Now here I see, at least for now, the potential that he may actually learn something about it and become a better person. We'll see how all of that continues in the future, however, because we're not yet there. What we should, however, look at, for a moment at least, is Caladan Brood and the Rivi going to war against the Malazans. And the idea that over the long term, a peace treaty and slow annexation or whatever is better than losing in a war and being conquered for a society. Now that's a very, this is one of the things that we obviously have seen the Malazan universe struggle with, because there's no easy answers for that. There have never been easy answers for that in our world as well. The point is that if you have two cultures bordering one, and now even the border part has been evaporated in our world because we have the digital age, and we're basically bordering to every single other culture out there that has access to the internet. But in that point, we still have sort of a physical border. We have two neighboring cultures of different, structure, different technological stages of technological development. Those kind of things, which is sort of the idea, like technology is about ideas. Ideas don't care about fucking borders. They'll cross. Whether those are good ideas or bad ideas is not so much the question. Like capitalism creeps like a cancer. Science also, which gives you higher survival rates and all of the higher life expectancies, which is fucking great. It comes at a cost, though. And one of those costs is the loss of your cultural identity, if you're the person on the other side of that. Like, yeah, I now have weapons made of steel, and we've learned about how not to bury our dead next to the well, which is great. On the other hand, we may just lose a lot of our identity in the process. And it's something that we in our world deal with. I would say, as someone from a culture that has historically been more on the giving than the receiving end of that kind of thing, like taking down cultures and kind of destroying them, it's very interesting and also very difficult to read about that, because you kind of fuck, we did all that. We didn't even do it necessarily by design, which is the other part. There is no actual design there, at least for most people, because societies as a whole are a huge group of people that don't actually make plans, which is stupid for that. But we see it from the perspective of Caladan Brood, who's seen that happen thousands of times, I guess, in his long life. I mean, he's been around when the Teist people did that to the Jellicans, so right, he's seen it happen before, again and again. What he mentions here is a very interesting thing. It's the question of trauma. It's a question of generational trauma. And that's why Caladan Brood goes the Rivi culture is basically going to die. That's just a question of time. The Malazans, whether it's the Malazans or anyone else, actual people, will take over that place, because a more agrarian pre-industrial culture will always take over a nomadic herder culture. That's just how it will end. However, if you are part of a group that has a cultural identity, and your cultural identity, your group is crushed militarily, that will enter into your group consciousness, into your, I don't want to say tribal here, but in your group consciousness, it will stay with you, and it will lead to all kinds of issues in further generations. Generational trauma is a real thing, something that I feel most societies deal with, but if you can avoid more of it, that's actually a pretty cool thing. I'm saying this as someone who lives in a country that has quite a bit of recent generational trauma, because we're what did our grandparents do? Or our parents or great-grandparents at this point, depending on which generation you are. It's we kind of genocided a lot of people. That was fucked up and terrible. We have to come to terms with the fact that this is something that happened, that was done by people that we possibly knew in person. And they didn't, I have great, I have grandparents who were obviously soldiers during the Second World War, and they were nice people when I met them, as far as I can remember. They weren't, mass murderers. Were they though? I don't know. Being on the losing end of a war, that where you feel that actually you lost the war for the, losing your culture and your war was like unjust. Like, don't get me wrong, Germany losing the Second World War II was actually a good thing. We deserved to lose. That's that plain and simple. Um, we have a different kind of generational trauma here, is what I'm trying to say. But the point is, if your culture fell apart and so forth, that stays with you for a long time, and it's something that, if it can be avoided, it should be avoided. Which is why that whole war thing bothers Callum Brood so much, and he's trying to negotiate now to avoid the worst. Will that succeed? We don't know, but at least he meets Torvald Nom, which is always good, because meeting Torvald Nom has helped before. Now, what else should we talk about? Now, the drama question is one that stays with us, because maybe it's time to start talking about Solara and Barathol here. Now, the Solara we met in House of Chains mostly, is obviously, and then Bone Hunters and Toll the Hounds, is a traumatized person. She, we know how she grew up. Was abandoned by her camp follower mother, who was who had was addicted to all kinds of drugs to deal with that kind of life. Solara, grew up the same way, and so forth. And now Solara is trying, or not trying, we don't know exactly, but Solara is in a more or less stable relationship with someone who doesn't have that kind of upbringing, who had a fairly solid upbringing, I would say. Now, is Barathol a good person or not? That's not exactly the problem. The problem that we're facing here is that Solara has maybe too much trauma to be a good mother, to even be interested in being a good mother, because she doesn't have any experience of having a mother or having parents in general. Which is, brings us back once again to that point that child-parent relationships are so important to the Malazan universe in general, and something that we tend to ignore in a lot of other fantasy. Now, obviously, you also have both kids that grew up on their own, or people that have loving parents or whatever. You have both in fantasy, but what we rarely see in other fantasy, but see a lot here in the Malazan world, and once again here, is how those traumas of early childhood are being perpetuated and perpetuate themselves. They don't end. It's as hard as it is, we can't just leave all that baggage behind and become a new person. It will always stay with us. Now, we can work on overcoming it, and you can certainly see Solara in other books, at least, making an effort to be a better person and all of that. But there's always that danger, that darkness that lurks, that you always carry with you. And I feel it's important to see that here. There's a second side to that, which I found really interesting. You have Barathol, when he's working there at nights, then he's doing all the household chores and looking after the kid and all of that stuff. And I feel that what he mostly does, that sequence and his thoughts of leaving and trying anew and all that stuff, we usually overlook the fact that most of the time it's women, mostly single moms, but also in a lot of cases, depending on what kind of society you're in, also working moms in a relationship, working mothers that still have to also work hard and still do, unless you happen to be in a family situation that we're sharing all the household chores and all the household stuff and kids raising, all that part of life of having a family that is important. are split equally. There's a lot of situations where that is not the case, where you have people that go to work and then also do all the household stuff, raise the kids and all that shit, and it's usually women. And by having a man face that issue here, what Cam Esslemont does, I feel, makes us realize how bad that situation is. Now, it's up to us as readers to go like, right, there's millions of women out there that face that situation all the time. That is unbearable and inhuman to have that situation, and almost impossible to cope with. But having like it is, and this is sad because it kind of shows how our society is built and our societal expectations are. It's like having that happen to a man makes it more like stand out more for us to actually glom onto and then realize what's going on, and then it's up to us to make that jump and realize that no, there's millions of people out there that face that situation. We should probably do something about that in the future, whatever that will be, what we do about it. But I don't know. Pay them for raising kids, no matter whether they are single parents or not, stuff like that. Well, this is not the social policy discussion with me, but the Orb Sceptre Throne discussion. There's another thing that is going on in Orb Sceptre Throne that we need to talk about, and I'm not sure if it is already time to do that, or if we should maybe wait until further chapters have happened. Which once again is about digging up the past to reclaim the present, and how that can go monstrously wrong. Which, is a fucking metaphor out there. Make the Rujistan great again. I don't know if that's a good idea. But we see people working on figuring out what is going on in the Rujistan. We have Spindle doing his thing, which is be a builder and realize that they're building like a magical foundation. We've already heard about that like dome thing that they're building, sort of. Where that will go, who the fuck knows? One more thing, however, that I feel is interesting to talk about is the conversation that Fisher has with Lady Envy. That one is important. The conversation they have about like doing something, and Lady Envy is like fully self-absorbed. It's like, yeah, I want the tyrant back because that will give me like a great court and all the beautiful things that I, as an elite person, really, really want to enjoy. And Fisher's like, how could you? That's terrible. And then Lady Envy confronts him with something that is actually valid. It's like, yeah, but poverty and all the other miseries of society have always been here, and you are fine with ignoring them because Fisher is a privileged person. But it's something else that kind of now incenses you. Like, what actually is the difference there? What kind of makes you go and say, not the tyrant, but I'm fine with the oligarchy that we had before? What's the difference? And that's something that we all, I feel like people that are privileged enough to live in the kind of situation that, I don't know, people like me that can actually make YouTube videos in a peaceful society. It's like, the world is a fucked up place, and we always know that at the bottom of our hearts. But what's the kind of things that trigger us into action? Where do we draw the line? And the problem, obviously, is that it's very much a personal thing. Also, caring about everything all the time will just, like, kill you. So we have to figure that out for ourselves, our mental health, and all these other terrible parts that make being a human in modern days so difficult, because it's one of the things why I feel a lot of us nowadays suffer so much from mental health issues, apart from the fact that we are now, obviously, more ready to accept mental health as a concern, and it is more present in our awareness than it was, I don't know, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, and so forth. The other side of it is that it has become much harder to ignore the general fucked upness, is that a word, of our planet because of mass media. It's a concept of like mostly the 20th century, I would say. It kind of starts obviously with like newspapers, but it kind of got like with actually radio, television, all of that stuff, and now the internet, it got worse. Like, we can't ignore that shit anymore, so it's bothering us much more, and not caring about everything is a, in general a survival trait. But once again, there's limits to that, and it's important to look at that and get clean with ourselves about it. It's like, yeah, do we care? Do we really, not care unless it, I don't know, something specific pisses us off? And even if so, does our getting angry at a specific injustice, is it invalidated by all the other injustices that we didn't care about? And I would say no. It does not invalidate our being angry, us doing something about a specific injustice. It's one of those terrible, it's basically whataboutism, but, in a more dramatic way here. So I feel it's an important one to see because, yeah, Fisher is elite. And he could have done more about other stuff as well. But that doesn't invalidate him taking a stand now. Also, it once again shows how Lady Envy is a psychopath. But we kind of knew that before. And it's interesting to look at that, especially if you have read the Carcanas trilogies. I'm really looking forward to finding out what happens to her in Walking Shadow, to see where all of that will lead in the future. So, what else was there to talk about? I don't know that much. I mean, obviously, right, body image. That's the last one I wanted to talk about here. We have the situation with Fist Kess, and whatever her name is from Seven Cities, his captain. I'm just really bad with names, and hers is like more than one syllable, so I'm even worse with that. Although we could probably also examine why I have difficulties remember women's names and not so much men's names, which will be a very uncomfortable self-examination, so I'm going to not do that today. My point is, however, the situation that we have there is, once again, apparently they are very much fascinated by each other on a sexual level. But they're also both having a lot of self-doubts and putting that aside. Is there a lesson to be learned there? One, first of all, that apparently neither one does, fulfill general body image stereotypes of attractiveness, and they're struggling with that individually, which, happens all the time and is fucked up, because there shouldn't be any, these ideas, stereotypes of attractiveness. They are dangerous to us. Everyone's struggling with them, and having both struggle with it, I feel, is important, because it's much more horrific with women's body images, it is also happening to dudes. And I don't know, it's just like a neat little thing to have that thrown in there on the side. How we tend to rein back our emotions in all kinds of ways, through self-doubt, cripple ourselves through self-doubt, through all kinds of stupid excuses and whatnot. So it's just cool to have that in there. Will it lead somewhere? Who the fuck knows? We'll find out in the future. I don't know. There's probably more to be had out of these 3 chapters, but I've been very distracted over a lot of things, so that's kind of where we are right now. I'll be back with more of it with chapters 11, 12, and 13, I think, on Monday. Now it's the weekend. I'll do other stuff on the weekend. I'll talk to you later, however, about those things. So, cheers.